So I want to say thank you for the chance to talk, because the truth is about me that this burns in me, and I suspect a lot of you might understand for yourself when you learn something about what the world needs, or you read Charles Eisenstein's book and you realize this is something that's needed. You burn for it to come out, and so that's how I am. And originally the talk that would have been this time with Daniel Osmer would have been about money and the future of money, and I'm happy to talk about that. But I will say that I experience very intensely that if I talk to you about money, I'd be entering into an abstraction, because money is a part of a whole, and the foundations of thinking that whole are not there, or they would need to be there in the presentation in order to have an understanding of what is said about money and have it mean something. So I can't start with money, and that's a fact. But what I'm starting with, for me, was the most important thing that I experienced, and that is if you want to say about money, what's the context that money appears in? Because we need to know that if we're going to talk about money. So what I want to share is, we're very cut for time, so I have an outline here that I'm going to follow as best I can, because it's very easy for me to go on tangents, and I don't want to, and I really want to create a specific experience for you all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share something I did, my own process. These were my observations, my thoughts, and I'm going to share some of this. And I could say that I also long for a situation where I could help a person have their own thoughts, or like pose phenomena and ask them what they think or where it goes. And I found that to be not an easy thing to do. It'd have to be in the right circumstances. So it's probably easier that I show mine, and it's not the only path. There's lots of things in it. I found it compelling, life-changingly compelling experience. So we'll see what you make of it. So I'm going to start, I don't know, I could use the board, but I asked the question, what is a social organism? And if you got on Wikipedia, which I did, if you look up organism, it's huge. It's long, lots. And if you look up social organism, it's tiny. It's very small. It's hardly a page. So these thoughts aren't actually developed, is the point. And so I'm hopefully contributing something to the development of that. And when I started, I did a simple thing, is I said, what is the most basic form of living organism? Got to start somewhere, right? And I went to school, got biology class, college, and all that. And so for me, you know, how much am I influenced by my culture? I came to look at the single cell organism, you know, with all its bits and its pieces and its inside. But I made a decision that I wouldn't start by going below that, not to RNA, you know, to viruses and stuff like that. I would say this, whether it's an amoeba or something that I learned in school, it has these life processes. So there are often life processes, and there are different ones. You know, if you get online again, you'll find that there are 7 life processes, and they're slightly different in different ways. Where Steiner had his own. I could put them up there. That's not the most important thing. That a living organism is recognized as living as opposed to a mineral, for example, because it has certain characteristics, things it does. And then there it is. You've got a life organism, and pretty much all life organisms have it. And you decide for yourself if you think science has thought this through properly after you experience this. So let's say that I take this starting point that a single cell is the most basic form of organism. Then I ask the question, and I'm proud that I did this. I was very naive. I literally didn't have a concept. How are complex, not simple organisms, or how are complex organisms found? And I went looking for it, and I was surprised. And now I'm surprised that I was surprised, because it's all multicellular. Have you experienced this? You don't see an amoeba that grows like an arm out of its one cell, or a cell that gets bigger, or things like that. There might be that in the world, but I haven't seen it. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that what I found is that plants and animals, but especially I find it interesting to talk about animals, it'll save us time, that it's a multicellular thing where you have the integrity of a cell that has these 7 life processes, but then it creates some kind of being, you know, and I'm going to put the person here, it creates a being, and we recognize this as the organism. And in a way, if we look inside, we find that it's filled with these little things that we also would consider an organism. And then I was doing that, and I was like, that's interesting. We can see a whole that's built up of parts, and then they found the part, they also found the part out like on its own, a single cell on its own, and they said that's an organism too. And that's an organism. And then I looked at the 7 life processes, and I noticed that I had a problem, because this one's missing something in its own, right? So reproduction, right, is not in a single human being or in a single dog or anything like that. So I've got a problem. So at least in terms of life, a single human, dog, or animal in general is not having all the 7 life processes. So then I said that it has to be, now I started exploring this. What is this? I didn't expect that. So what's that? There's an organism. Because now they can reproduce. And then I said, but is that the form? This is the basic form of some dog or human living organism. And I said, you know, it creates a family, and that's fine, but I don't think that that's the basic form. So I came to the experience that in life, practically, I'm just being practical, I'm not trying to split hairs, that a tribe would be like a number of families, and that is a basic form we see all over the place. And then what would I call that? So I had an experience that, well, this must be the beginning of perceiving a social organism, that it's an organism. In order to have the life processes work properly, you can't just have one. So I explored this, and I made a discovery for myself, which was this. We are used to experiencing something as a whole. We have a sense for it. That's a whole, that's a person, that's a dog, that's a cat. And it's in its skin, and it has some stuff going on inside it. There it is. But if this is an organism, because it's got 7 life processes, then this is an organism that I don't experience in one skin. I experience it next to itself. And then I found, I did some work with this, and more or less, I looked at inside the cells, at how they were set up and everything, and I asked what their relationships were. And you know, in biology, you hear things about cells that's independent, similar cells, tissue. Tissues gather organs, organs gather systems. So let's just take an organ, and I started looking and I said, so what's the relationship? How do they function? And there's a really important point that people experience eventually is that if you're going to ask this question, you have to ask it a certain way for it to be most productive. What would the relationship of these parts be if the whole is going to be healthy? Because healthy is sort of, you're posing yourself already to meet the thing in its essence, what it wants to be, in a sense, you could say. Healthy. So this is a big piece for me. And I'm going to tell you what I saw. And I found that the parts had a certain relationship, and it was this, that every part had something it needed, and every part had something it did. And every part that did it didn't do it for itself. It did it for the sense of the whole, or for the purpose of making the whole healthy. And if it worked properly, if it was guided properly, if it was functioning properly, then if there were enough resources coming in and available, and every part did its part, then that organism would be healthy. And then what would be the activity in their relationship? And that would be that each part that needed something in order to do its activity would get that. Not more, not less. And then the sense of the activity would also be to meet the needs of the whole. And then I looked at this particular thing, say the lungs. Now, there are concepts in the world that, like in terms of economics, there's productivity. You know, do as much as you can, be as productive as you can, make as much as you can. So I kind of had this in my mind, and I said, so how do the lungs work? Well, right now, what is the sense of what determines what my lungs are doing for me to be healthy? If my lungs do as much as they can, I'll go out of balance and I'll fall on the floor. If my lungs do it much less than they're doing now, eventually I would fall on the floor. So what determines what my lungs do? And I had the experience that it is what I do. If I'm walking, my lungs have a task. If I'm running, it changes. It's all about what I want to do. So the sense of the organism is actually in the activity, if you will, the will or the intention. You're going to find that as the organizing principle of how these things work if it's going to be healthy. So then I said, I met with Craig Holdridge, and this was early on, and I told him a little bit about this, and he said the concept you're looking for you haven't used yet is interdependence. And I was like, oh, okay, didn't know that, and that's fine. And so then I started saying, okay, so then the cells are interdependent, and that meant that if I'm sharing the life processes, that those are interdependent. And then I had a very intense experience in relationship to economy, but I'm going to keep going. I said that, first of all, the most important thing I'll start with is that this is a social organism, okay? So I'm just going to name it that. And I'll ask this question, although that we don't have this developed very much in the world, do we recognize social organisms as people? And I said, oh, my goodness, we recognize them all over the place. Because we say herds of cattle, we say pods of dolphins, we say packs of dogs and wolves, we say family, interdependent wholes, we say tribe, we say city, we say state, we say lots of things. So we are recognizing wholes, but we've abstracted it from life. It's not a social organism, it's an organization. I've abstracted it. A corporation is also a whole. We can talk about these things, but this is the beginning of waking up to life. What I want to say is it seems to me that economics and money is a life science, abstracted out of life, and that's why it's a train wreck. But I'll show you a few more things. That interdependence in this shows me the organism. These two are interdependent, so there's another organism. So I learned or had the experience that if you follow the interdependence and it stops somewhere, then that could be the boundary of that particular social organism. And you'll hear Rudolf Steiner talk about world economy. That is a moving of a boundary. So then I said, okay, I can work with that. But then I said, so what is also interdependent with a human being? And the simple thing is you say, like, let's say the animals we depend on for food and the plants we depend on for food. Let's say that I'm interdependent with that, and you are too. And we could see, you're going to see a lot of stuff in the Climate book by Charles Eisenstein, where people say, well, we don't need all those species, we just need a few. Let's wrap ourselves with our animals and our food, and we're all set. And then the plants are interdependent with a lot of bugs and worms, and those worms and bugs are interdependent with a lot of different things. And if you track this interdependence, you see what's happening? What gets left out of interdependence, demonstrating a higher organism to me, to you, right? So then you end up with this thing where you realize that everything on the earth is interdependent with everything on the earth, and the thinking suggests to you that the earth is an organism. And if I think that the earth is an organism, what does that do to my original assessment of the cell as being an independent life form? Is a cell of my body an independent life form? Do I have that concept? Does anybody? And it's part of me. And there's certain relationships I notice. So I just want to point that the consistency of thinking is that if this isn't independent of this one, then this isn't independent of the earth. And neither are we. So now we have a big question. This is how one can come to Gaia. And of course we can ask, where does Gaia stop? Like, what is Gaia interdependent with? And perhaps there's something else. And for people who work with spiritual science, there is something else. And I imagine that's so. But I don't work with that right now because it's at the moment beyond my direct experience. So I had a few things I wanted to show you about this. If I perceive a body like an animal body with a bunch of cells in it, and I call that a whole, from a certain perspective, especially a materialistic perspective that calls a cell an independent organism, this is already a social organism. From a certain way of thinking, a human body or an animal body is already a social organism. It has life forms proper that reproduce and do all their things, and they're being wrapped in a thing. And it's a beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful pictures in here. So I've given you most of that beginning. We got to Gaia. Now I want to share a thought. This is so powerful to me. When I'm an abstractionist or a reductionist or a modern person who experiences the world as other than me, which is important. We all know about evolution here, and that's a natural state for human beings to come into. We didn't used to be in this state. We're experiencing or have experienced it for some centuries. The self is arising, and we feel separate from the world. That my original way of saying is, oh, there's an independent cell bouncing around, going into survival of the fittest. fighting for its survival and going through some process. Now, as I raise my context, I see social organisms of higher orders. I see the Earth as Gaia, as an organism. I have to kind of cast out that idea. I should, if I'm being honest, cast out the idea that this is a dependent and ask what an interesting organism this Earth is, the way it functions. And so I describe this experience of going to higher contexts also as the relationship of ideals. We have higher ideals. So these are two, the higher context demonstrates to us a lawfulness. So the lawfulness in the body is that every part needs what it needs to do its job. And it does its job according to the balance and health of the whole. And so if we were to use a modern economic process, say on the liver, and say the liver is going to become wealthy, we find fatty livers and you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, you're in trouble, sir. You've got all this extra energy and power stored up in your liver and you're ill. So the idea of accumulation of resources, assets, energy, or anything, in organisms, this doesn't pan out. This is too little, you're in trouble, too much, you're in trouble. What's it based on? What you want to do. You walk in, you're running, what are you doing? So these are, for me, they become basis of real thoughts. And if I was to say to you, the idea of division of labor, it allows us to look at labor, and it allows us to abstract it. It's just human beings doing their labor in a little system that have abstracted outside of life. People can look at that all day long for their whole life and never have a real thought about an organism or a social organism. How about if I said to you that division of labor should probably more accurately be called division of life processes, human life processes. Lots of neat things that we do. So that would be the beginning of also having experience of what an abstraction is. Division of labor, I've extracted labor. Division of life processes, I'm saying that out of an organism. I've seen that first. Now I can talk to you about money. Because we have a basis of a whole that's going to guide us with some lawfulnesses. Interdependence is a fact. So when we enter into division of labor, we enter into interdependence as a fact. Whether we like it or not, those who we are interdependent with, we're creating a higher form of organism. And if I was to use the lawfulness of what I've seen here, I would have to say that every part of that organism requires its needs to be met in order for it to do its task, to be healthy and balanced, and to participate in giving to the whole and making it a complex organism. How complex is Gaia as an organism? How complex is a human compared to human culture? Human culture is very complex. So I'm pointing out some things to you that I experience. Now, Rudolf Steiner formulated some social laws, fundamental laws, and it's an interesting thing is because this is a process of going up to higher ideals, higher contexts, and then looking back and changing the way we see. But if you look at some of the, I didn't write it down and I haven't memorized it, but the fundamental social law that the whole will be healthier or better off or more prosperous, the more that the work of the individual is not done for themselves, but is given over to the whole, which is to say that the organs of a higher organism are meeting the needs of the organism, not itself. And then the needs of the individual are met by the whole. So that it's just a mirror of this picture of a complex organism. And there's another one which has to do with that the community is in a better position and healthier, the more that the whole can perceive the individual, and then the more that the individual carries in its activity a picture of the whole. How other way could it work? So there is a lawfulness that one can experience in a living organism, if one thinks it, and realize that this applies so to the social organism. So now for me, I would just suggest that I experience this as the beginning of the science of economics. So I'll shift to money. My time's good. I had an experience in it. It was very intense. I wanted to understand money, and since I have a finance degree, when I did it, I was always applying financial concepts, and it made me nuts. But it did something more, which is strange, is I literally was thinking, and I slipped off it into nothing, and I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I didn't know my thoughts. And I noticed, what am I doing? And I said, oh, I'm studying money. I'm trying to figure out money. Money, what is money? And it happened again. And I got frustrated, and I said, this isn't working. And all the concepts I was using were these modern concepts. So I said, this isn't how I do my work, and this isn't working. So I said, okay, let's do it phenomenologically. So here's a person who comes, and he made a broom, super simple. Here's me, money. I give money, other gives broom. What happened? I turn away from that person. Now I got my broom. That person turns away from me. We're not going to exchange again. He's not going to give me money for something else. We're not bartering. And that person's going, and then I ask, what is money communicating or doing? What is money doing? I should also say communicating. And the experience I had, and this is something I think that may or may not take long for people to be able to articulate out of themselves. I don't know. My experience is, I want to say that this is a goal. It seems right to me. Money's communicating that this person has a right, having the money, to go to another person and demand the products of their labor to be received as a gift. Because it's not much different. If I didn't give money, I just looked at the one side. It used to be yours, now it's mine, you can do what I want. It's very similar to a gift. I gave it to you, I used the language, now it's yours, and then I gave to you something. And then you take the money and you're waiting because you're excited about that because you're going to give it to somebody else so you can get something, they're going to give you something. And there's a social contract, a social understanding. And I pointed before to evolution, and I said that the Declaration of Independence said, we all have a right to life. And in here, I would say, yeah, if things are healthy, then each part gets what it needs. It has a right to it even. If it didn't, the whole would perish or suffer. But anyway, if you change the term, because we're social, we call it a right. There's a few things I want to say about that, and I don't want to get lost. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence, for me, because this is articulated, we have a right to life, it is an evolutionary significant document. It doesn't pan out yet in culture. It's not reflected back. And one of my favorite films to indicate this, or stories, it's very special, and it's called Les Miserables, because it is miserable, this fact. There's a guy in the story, Jean Valjean, he doesn't have money, he suffers that. And he's hungry, and he's responsible for a child, and he's in the city, and he's in a place, and he's across from where everybody would normally get their food. And he doesn't have money. So, if I understand it right, he cracks the window and takes the food. But does this man have a right to life in this culture? The right to eat? No, because he didn't have money to express his right. He didn't have a right to that food, and the law comes down. So then I say, so Thomas Jefferson, and perhaps others, could articulate in their hearts that we have a right to life. But we don't follow through in any practical way. So money would have to change, and I have a very strong picture of how that would work. So I want to say that hidden in money is rights, and it's a big deal. Because if you study threefolding in social life and how it really wants to be for health, rights have to be an agreement. You can't oppress somebody with rights. That'd be a problem, and you can't buy a right. And I always find myself reflecting on there was a time when the church would sort of sell, someone would come and give them money so they could buy their way into heaven. And today we all think this is absurd. If you're really spiritual, yeah, you can't buy your way into heaven. It's nice that you gave to the church. But buying rights is a similar absurdity. You can't buy a right. And people, I think this is a feeling we need to develop. Can't buy a right, yet we do. And I want to demonstrate one thing about buying a right that's a total aberration. Because when I make a trade, like Steiner calls it purchase money, we make a trade, money has a certain value relationship. You know, if I tell you I'm going to buy stuff and it costs 100, that's different than 1,000, it's different than 100,000. But now if I also use money to buy rights and my house is 500,000 and I use it for that. So I use this money for rights. So I buy a house and I buy a house and I buy a house. But someday I decide I'm cashing that in and I'm taking $500,000 and I'm going to not use it in the rights market, the purchasing of rights, or the asset market, right? I'm going to use it as purchase money. What an aberration. What a totally disturbing thing. Suddenly you have $500,000 to buy donuts with or cars. Like, what it breaks, like, because all these other people who are going out there with their normal purchase money and their normal amount of rights in the culture, now you have somebody that manifests a purchase right that is astronomical. So I just want to show the aberration of this. So when the other day Jeffrey was saying, like, we have to separate the rights and money, I mean, what a gift that people are starting to wake up to this. Because it distorts money in the most incredible way. And there's a whole other way to do it. I want to tell you about 3 kinds of money from my perspective. There are lots of people who work with this from the economy lectures, and I did a long time ago, and I think it's great. But I haven't yet experienced, and maybe they're there, express it in a way that I do out of phenomenological thinking. Because what is the essential nature of the differences of purchase money, loan money, and gift money? What is the difference? Should I write that down? I'll just put P for purchase, L for loan, and G for gift. And if we just phenomenologically look at it, if I do a purchase transaction, we've got room and money exchanged. I gave, you gave, reciprocation, fairness. I gave, you gave, reciprocation, and fairness. Now, loan money is something different. I got, you don't. I give to you with some stipulation that I expect you to be productive, and you're going to give it back, and you're going to put it in the place it was before. You're going to use it for a time. It's mine, my rights anyway. You're going to use it for a time, and I expect you to give it back. It's a contract with expectation. Gift money goes. It's about something else. I could say a lot about what it's about, but it's a one-way transaction. It's from someone who has, giving to someone who could use. And the best is when you have a really developed picture of evolution, and you know what it means to develop a human being, and you know what it means to society, and you know what it means to the spiritual world. I could even show you where gift comes from, because this is another picture that I think is a mess. Because people think wealth is connected to ownership, is connected to assets, is connected to buying rights and holding lots of rights. And that's unfortunate. And this phenomena of the past to show how this didn't happen. You know, I asked Christopher Budd these kinds of historical things when I was younger. And basically, in the olden days, he said something like about Social Security, and I realized it hasn't been around very long, and I was literally shocked. Like, God, what came before Social Security? And there were different lives, but the picture he gave me, now this isn't everything, it's something. So we can work with it as something. That you have a house and a family lives in it, and they have children, and the children start to grow up. And in the house also are the parents of those folks. And so let's just say, for kindness' sake, the parents live downstairs, and the younger folks walk up and down the stairs. Eventually, the grandparents pass away, the children start to age, and the parents start to age, so the parents come downstairs, and the children who are aging go upstairs, and they start having kids. And the family retains the house. So who bought it and who sold it? I'm just pointing that out, that they didn't so much buy it and sell it. Now, another thing happened that I think is so important. When I saw this, this is so wakeful to me, because we heard people talk about, one of our friends here said something, and I liked it. Up to a point I had to make it practical. I still like it, but it was that we use trust funds, we have a retirement fund, we have all this stuff. And I just find that that's what we have, but what are the thoughts? So this is what's behind the thought. These people are of age to produce for others, age and capacity. These people are, let's just say they're old, or they're retired, or they're handicapped, or whatever they are, and they don't work in the sense of producing the necessities of life that a living organism needs. And I wanted to say that this is a huge thing, the necessities of life. Don't let me forget it. And then down here you have a child. So these people produce. And this is the basis of any Social Security at any time. If in 100 years, I want to wonder, or in 20 years, I want to wonder who can collect, how much security is there to collect? It has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with how much food is available, et cetera, et cetera. It's a real thing. If I have a lot of money and we get a devastating situation where a lot of people die, that money doesn't do anything. The money is a right. Again, it's a convoluted way to give a person a right to a certain amount of this that's being produced by the people who are producing in the moment when they decide to call on it. I'm no longer going to work in food, shelter, clothing, or the basic necessities of life, or whatever processes are in the social organism. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to step out. How do I get a right to continue to live? So the other part of this, and what's kind of interesting about the child is children are already met as a right. You're born and the family just pours it on as a gift. Here's your feeding, here's your changing, here's your clothes, here's your education. We're not asking to pay for anything. And in a lot of cultures, you'll see the child grows up and enters here, and then the child goes over here. And when the child's here, it's their parent they're taking care of. So first the parent is, the parent is here with the child. Parent moves up, child moves up, and it's still taking care of it. And then this one's taking care of its child. And then that one moves up, taking care of the adult, taking care of the child. That's a real picture. Social Security is unfortunate, and trust funds or funds are even more unfortunate. And since I have time, I'm going to show you something. If you start to think in terms of life and living organisms, if you start to think about, let's see, I want to make sure I know what I'm telling you. I don't want to forget it. That's the one. This is an interesting fact for the scientists out there. So if I look at a human being, right, and I say, how does a human being start, right? We start as a single egg, and then it starts to divide, and a certain amount of the activity in here, or the beings in here, are cells that came from our original cell. But that's not all. And I don't know a lot about this stuff, but I know this, that there's also bacteria in there, and we call it symbiotic. And if that wasn't there, we wouldn't quite be what we are, and there's probably lots of other stuff. And for those of you who have read Craig Holdridge's book, Thinking Like a Plant, and it shows the milkweed and the process of reproduction in the milkweed, it is a bizarre thing that there's this, I think it's red, a red beetle that walks across the milkweed and steps in a hole and by accident, right, hooks a seed out and keeps walking. And it hooks for a while, and at some point it goes on to another plant because it can't be on the same one, and it drops it in another plant. And the only food that that beetle eats is milkweed. And if that beetle wasn't there, the milkweed wouldn't happen. So I'd ask you, what's a milkweed? Because it seems to me, without that symbiotic beetle, it's not a milkweed. So if I look at a milkweed as an independent living organism, my thinking isn't so good. Something wrong with it. So now here's an organism, and these are working together. We call it symbiotic. That's a relationship. Now, what's an organism that comes in and takes a little bite out of that? It takes it away. It's not part of that organism. It doesn't act part of it, and it just takes a bite out of it. And that is a parasite, right? So if I take that activity of not feeling like it's a part of a whole of an organism, and it goes in and takes a little bit out, I just described to you the basic self-interested activity of capitalism. I'm not part of that whole. There's the marketplace. I'm going to go in and take my bite out of it and pull it out, extract it out. So it's one thing to say that, and it's great because there's a new economy movement, and they started to say, this is an extractive economy. Capitalism is extractive. It's a beautiful concept. They're extracting from the earth. They're extracting from each other. You're always trying to extract. But your relationship, you're told from the beginning that you're a parasite under a different name. Now, what is worse than that? Inside, if a certain group of cells stop functioning in the sense of the organism, and they start to function broken from that, they often grow larger and larger, and we call it cancer. And it will grow, and it doesn't work according to the sense of that organism, but it's in it. And then it starts to often, if it grows, it presses up against stuff and it damages it. And it eats. So it sucks out of it. So what's a cancer? Is there any cancer in our social organism? And I would love for everybody to get this would be, because every fund, every financial fund is a cancer. Because it's in a social organism. It treats itself as if it's independent in another organism altogether. And then what it wants to do is, I would call it ugly. It wants to monetize all the activity around it. It wants to monetize human activity into something other than human activity. And then it wants to, which is basically to put it into a number. And then it has its own reasons, its own methods, and its own purposes for pushing these numbers in different directions, because it has its goals, which is not connected to what makes a human being healthy. It's not connected to what makes a society healthy or the planet healthy. But it pushes these numbers around, and if it succeeds, the numbers go up like it wants to. And then this fund, yeah, I'm just going to share because this is how I experienced it. So you've heard about the number of the beast, this sort of, it rang in my head that this is a beast of number, okay? Because it wants to consume human activity in a transformed, abstract manner into its own purposes. And for those of you who loved, like I did, Star Trek: The Next Generation, there was a wonderful imagination that we need to know about called the Borg. And the Borg was this conglomerate abstraction in cubes with no life, no artistic, no anything, no life of independence. It had a hive mind, and it would go out and absorb cultures. Whatever they were, it was just absorbed, overridden by the hive mind, and assimilated. And they would basically say, resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. This is the fun. Resistance is futile. It's billions of dollars. Do you think you can stand up to it buying out everything? Resistance is futile. We will absorb you into our thing. We'll churn you out for our own purposes and make you into us. You're going to serve us. So I just want to say, maybe I've said that imperfectly. I apologize if I have. But this fund is a cancer of the worst kind. And human beings ride this horse. They get on this machinery of number. Because if you look at how it works, these abstractions, these monetizations, it's a kind of a nasty machine. And these human beings serve that machine, thinking they're serving themselves while they're degrading the social organisms. Okay. That is the majority, in less time than I expected, of what I wanted to say. I'll say one more thing because it's the beginning of a process. Do you guys know about Rich Steiner, value 1 and value 2? I don't know if Steiner does what I'm about to say with it. I do it, so someone think it's special. Value 1 is that a human being transforms nature. So he's basically saying if a human being acts on nature, then that activity of the human being adds something to nature. And that would be, say, value or monetary value, and people would tend to pay for it. So if we take rights out of the picture and we say there's an apple tree and you can just walk out there and take an apple, no one's going to charge you for it. But if someone goes out to that apple and puts it in the basket and brings it back and brings it to a market somewhere else, you don't have to travel there, you're going to pay for it if all they did was put it in the basket. And then if they do more to it, the price goes up. So what I noticed is that in value 1, the more effort a person puts into it, the price goes up. But value 2 is when human intelligence or spirit transforms the way work is done and more productivity comes out of it. What happens to the price? The price goes down. The value in it goes up. There's no doubt about it, there's more value in it. But it didn't take human resources. Now sometimes, you can even say it takes less human resources. When my dad and I started a company together, really he started and I followed along, it was commercial cleaning. And the first night that a new person who was going to do that job went in, they took about 4 hours, probably. In the end, they took 1, maybe 1.5. I'm telling you, it was that difference. They go in, they almost cry to you. They're like, I'll never be able to do this. I don't know how to do this. I came in, it takes 4 hours. You told me it's going to be, and they're like, patience. And then later they're doing, they're like, I learned how to do it. Because this efficiency is a real thing. And it means that a human being can do less with more when you become more intelligent in your activity. So the price tends to go down. The other thing about this V2 is sometimes by adding intelligence, we replace a human being with some kind of machine. And then we also have inputs for it. So you have metals in the machine and whatever you have in the machine, and then you might have energy and whatever you have going into it. And then that's an interesting thing. You take a person out, but you actually, there's still costs going in. So the cost doesn't necessarily go down just purely down. The costs actually go up, just it's being shifted. And I guess I did want to tell you this last thing. If food, shelter, and clothing is something everybody has to do to live, then if you want to do something other than food, shelter, and clothing, then let's say these people are going to do something other than food, shelter, and clothing, then these people have to make more food, shelter, and clothing than they need personally, and there's extra. So surplus arises. So when Industrial Revolution came, people became so productive that there were all these people on farms, and now there's like such a tiny percentage of people on farms. And what happens there? It's actually an astoundingly beautiful picture. And it's the picture that as spirit comes in and the human being transforms their earth, transforms the means of doing things, gains more and more command, the necessity part of their life is far, far less demanding. It's really taken care of. And there are pictures of sci-fi and stuff, you know, you push a button and Earl Grey, right? Patrick Stewart, as Picard says, Pizza Machine says Earl Grey. This is when technology, as an imagination, I'm not saying it should or will go there, but that technology is like just taking care of all necessities. And this surplus starts to make it possible to do something other than food, shelter, and clothing, which means that the human being gets to do spiritual stuff. So if it's very easy to meet our needs of food, shelter, and clothing, then you can be an artist. Lots more people can be artists. People can be doctors, lawyers, researchers, educators, anything with food, shelter, and clothing. So for me, it's a picture that's a problem when people say, let us automate like this, right? If you automate, you bring in machines, and then these people are free. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends. If this person is destitute on the street, it's a bad thing. If they're part of an organism, a higher organism, that is now free to do something unique and creative and grow, then it's very interesting. And Steiner pointed to one of the most important things we're going to be confronted with, is that people were going to be trained for something and it would change. It would become either obsolete or change. And so he said a huge thing was going to be helping people move to the next thing. So if you made carriages, things change when you got a car. Things will continue to change. We had lots of phones. We don't make them like that anymore. All these people have to be retrained. So when the automation comes, today with this insanity of capitalism, people are worried about being destitute. It's a crisis of untold proportions. A question, what is people going to do? So if you have this picture of social organism and organism, temperance naturally is played in because too much is no good for anyone, nor is too little. So I'm just pointing out a whole bunch of things that radically transform the way we would function. And I guess I do want to do this since I really do have time. I'm surprised by it. So I'm going to show you one more thing, because I could say I spent years asking the question, what about money creation? This is not an easy thing to think if nobody's telling you, and you have to figure it out for yourself. So I asked myself if money, so one of the big issues we have in our time is that money comes first to give you the right. So that it can stand for power, and if you have money, you have power, and if you don't, you don't. So I'm going to show you what I perceive as one way to transform money, and this is the future of money, because this was also on the title. So, okay, so let's say there's lots of people who are interdependent, and they're here, and everybody puts on the table their budgets. So they budget out specifically what and how much they think they need. Okay, so we see that all the way around, and then everybody puts it together and say, this is how much food, shelter, clothing, cars, everything you need is all laid out. And then the second question is asked, who's going to do what? And so these people, I'm going to do this, and this person will volunteer here, this person will say, I got a problem, I'm something else, I'm not going to be doing that. This person may say, it's really easy for me to do a lot. This person may say, it's only easy for me to do this. Everyone's going to put in their initial inputs, and then it's going to be compared. Now, everybody's going to volunteer this. This is a thought. So everyone volunteers. It's no coercion. Everybody says what they think they want to do, because we don't know this already. And then we compare what everybody has offered to what everybody asked for. And you're going to have one of two things happen. Either you're going to say, hey, a lot of people want to work and we're very efficient. We had no problem meeting your budget. In fact, we can overshoot your budget. So, I don't know, you want more? Well, what are we going to do with it? Or we're going to find, oh God, your budget's way too high and that's not enough work. Who's going to step up? How are we going to fill the gap? You have two choices. More people are going to work more, or you're going to lower your ask. Common sense. So once I sort this out, who's going to do what, and I know what everybody's budget is, I'm going to sign the dotted line. I'm going to make an agreement, which is the essence of a rights life. And you'll notice in this, there's not everybody's the same in this. Some can, some can't. Some want more, some need less. And it shouldn't be want, it should be need. It should be that this is what I require to do what I need to do. You make your agreement, and then you issue the money. You just issue it every year or every period. You issue it, and then you go and do your transactions using money. And you, over the course of time, you can make your adjustments. Oops, do we need more of this, less of this? And what does money become but a language? So when people talk about money in the future, they forget sometimes, I think, that money came into existence at some point, and it transforms itself. It really wants to become a language, and I want to say a few words about language. We have different kinds of languages. We have language for the weather, very specific ones. And if you live up north, Eskimos apparently have tons of words for different kinds of snow. We don't, they do. We have languages for our relationships. In a moment, I can tell you, father, mother, grandfather, cousin, uncle, you know what I'm talking about. So what is this language? This is the language of human activity. It's initiative. It's the way we develop our language of what we're doing for each other in the economic life. And it needs to be way more developed so that it doesn't have its aberrations and we start accounting for the right things. Because you saw before in GDP, they don't account for the woman or man who takes care of their kids not accounted for, or caring for your neighbors not accounted for, all this unpaid stuff. If you don't monetize it, it's invisible, it doesn't exist to them. That's kind of crazy if you really think about it. I don't mind saying that. So money wants to become a language. That's the other thing I wanted to say. And I want to show you, for those of you here who study a little bit of spiritual science, right? We all do here, but I don't know who's going to watch this. But I had an experience of this. If today the way that money works is if you want to get something done, how do you get it done? Building a house, money. So I have the intention, and then the money moves from me to another person, and the money brings that into manifestation. So we have, for me, this is just a picture I had, we have the Godhead, right? In the beginning was the Word, and it said, let there be light. So something came here and there was light. And this was the Word that went between the intention and the manifestation of light. It's more powerful than that, but if maybe you see what I'm saying, I found it significant that when we're bringing something into manifestation, the divine, we call it a word. And then I want to tell you that money wants to become a language. It seems to me there's a relationship between this. It's one way that we express, say, put your money where your mouth is. It's all these different things are connected to showing that it has a relationship to language. So, you know, barring any big changes in my experience, I think money wants to become a language, and it does not want to be what it's doing, what it's doing.